Hello everyone, welcome back to Interferons Science class number 176. We'll be continuing with the topic human health and disease. I'll be moving ahead with the second lecture of immunity. This video is in entire complete English language. So all our Hindi medium students are requested to watch the same video in the Hindi language, which is available in the playlist. See, in the last lecture I talked about some barriers of the innate immunity, which included anatomic or physical barriers, physiological barriers, cellular or phagocytic barriers, and cytokine or inflammatory barriers. These are four basic barriers in innate immunity. In the last video we discussed the top three barriers, that is anatomic, physiological and cellular barrier. In this video I'll be having a discussion on cytokine or inflammatory barriers. So let's start with the words that we are using. The first word is cytokine. What is cytokine? Cytokine is basically a cell signaling molecule. That means a molecule which is acting like a signal between two cells, released by a cell, and then this particular molecule acts as a signal for the other cells in the vicinity. These are called as cytokines. These are basically soluble proteins which are secreted in response to any infection or injury and helps in the activation of immune system. Any injury or infection that is damaging a tissue, then the tissues in that area, the cells there produce cytokines, and these cytokines helps in the activation of immune system. Now how does it take place? I'll discuss it in detail in a few minutes. See, whenever there is an infection or injury to a local site, the cytokines are secreted, and these cytokines signal the immune cells for their activation, and the entire immune system gets activated. And the best examples of cytokines are interferons and interleukins. There is a long list of cytokines. Cytokines has innumerable number of molecules in it, but at this level for the NEET exam I'll be discussing the most important of them, that is interferons and interleukins. If I start with the interleukins, I'll split the word interleukin. Look here, inter means in between, and leukins has been derived from the word leukocyte, that means WBCs, that means in between WBCs. That means this is a molecule that is produced by a WBC and helps in the activation of other WBCs. Now the term depend on what kind of WBC is releasing it. For example, if a lymphocyte WBC releases interleukin, then it is called as lymphokine, and if a monocyte releases it, then it is called as a monokine. Both lymphokines and monokines are types of interleukins. I'll explain this via this animation. Suppose there is an infection, and this infection is stimulating WBCs, and in response to the stimulation, these WBCs release interleukins, and these interleukins, when released, they'll activate some other immune cells, helping in the activation of immunity. Now I'll talk about the second type of cytokine, that is interferons. This topic interferon is very important, and the question on interferons are frequently asked in NEET exams. They are glycoproteins, and I'll explain the role of interferons by this simple animation. Suppose these are some adjacent cells present in any tissue, and this is a virus. A virus infected a cell. Now the only cell that is infected with the virus is this one here. The rest three cells are not infected, so this cell gets infected. Now when this cell gets infected, then this cell produces interferons. Remember, interferons are produced only by the cells that are infected by virus and not bacteria, fungus or any other pathogen. Only virus infected cells are produce interferons. This is a very important question. Now the cell that releases interferons, the interferons now then enters the cells that are present in the vicinity or the adjacent cells. Remember, interferons cannot protect the cell that has already been infected with the virus. It is produced by the virus infected cell and helps in providing resistance to the adjacent cells. Now when the interferons enter these adjacent cells, then these adjacent cells produce a protein called as translation inhibiting proteins, and because of the production of these translation inhibiting proteins, these cells are now resistant to this particular virus. So what has interferon done? Interferons has helped in providing resistance to those cells that are still not infected with the virus. If I talk it in notes, so virus infected cell produce IFNs, and these IFNs then act on adjacent cells and they produce translation inhibiting proteins, which then provides antiviral resistance against virus for these adjacent cells. Remember, interferons are always species specific. Interferon produced by a particular species won't perform its role in any other species. Now I'll talk about the word inflammation. See, inflammation basically means burning, and this word in this term was given way back in medicine, so the word has not been changed yet. But what is an inflammation? Remember, inflammation is a response produced by the body itself. It is a local response of living mammalian tissue to any injury, to any infection, to any toxin produced by any pathogen that have entered your body, to any foreign body that has entered your body, to other physical agents like extreme heat, extreme cold or radiations, or any other chemical. So these substances, when they enter a living mammalian tissue, the living tissue would always produce a response against them, and that response is called as inflammation. So basically it is a body defense reaction like fever. In the last lecture we discussed how fever helps in elimination of pathogens, limits the spread of the pathogen, and also helps in the activation of immune system. So fever is also produced by the body, and similarly inflammation is also produced by the body, and it helps in the elimination, or it limits the spread of the pathogen or the injurious agent. It also helps in the removal of the cells that have died, and this is called as necrosis. What is cell necrosis? Cell death is called as cell necrosis. Those necrosed cells and tissues are phagocytosed, are removed by the inflammation, and after that the healing of tissues also comes under inflammation. Now, often students get confused between the words infection and inflammation. See, infection is invasion of the tissues by microbes, and when these microbes invade your body, they produce toxins, and these toxins produce ill effects on your body. So that is infection. Infection is not produced by your body itself. Now, in response to that infection, the response produced by the body is called as inflammation. Now remember, inflammation is not only produced against any infection, but also against any injury or any other foreign body. So inflammation is a protective response by the body against any agent that can be infectious or non-infectious, but infection is the invasion of the body by microbes. What are the signs of inflammation? There are 4 cardinal signs of inflammation. Cardinal means fundamental, so there are 4 fundamental signs of inflammation, and this is very astonishing and surprising that these 4 cardinal signs of inflammation were given in the 1st century AD itself. So the 4 basic signs of inflammation includes: the first one is the rubor or redness, second one is tumor or swelling, the third one is scalar or heat, or the fourth one is dolor or pain. So these 4 things, redness, swelling, heat and pain, are 4 cardinal signs. And after many years, scientist Virchow has added one more sign in inflammation, that is called as loss of function, which was later added. But if you talk about 4 cardinal signs, then that are redness, swelling, heat and pain. Loss of function of that particular part was introduced after some time. So in this picture, if there was, suppose there is any injury to this elbow, then it will first produce pain, the first sign. The localized area around the elbow would be having an increased temperature, that means heat is produced. You would see the affected area as redness, and there would be swelling. So these are 4 fundamental signs of inflammation that are always produced in inflammation. Now listen to this carefully. Whatever I am discussing right now, I'll discuss about the entire pathway of inflammation, plus how these 4 cardinal signs are produced, and plus what lead to the formation of these 4 cardinal signs, what chemicals are involved in this. I'll discuss everything here in this slide. So listen carefully. Suppose there is any injury or infection or invasion of any foreign body in any particular tissue. Now every tissue has got connective tissue, and there are mast cells present in connective tissue. If the blood vessels are also involved in the injury, then the basophils present in the blood also behave in the same way as mast cells behave, and that's why we call basophils as the mast cells of blood. Remember, blood is also a connective tissue. So when the normal connective tissues have mast cells, blood has basophils. Now what basophils and mast cells do, they produce some chemicals, they release some chemicals, and the most basic are the histamine and the prostaglandins. Now histamine, what histamine would do, it would produce two main effects on that particular site. The first is the vasodilation. Vasodilation means increased diameter of the blood vessels. Dilation of vessels is vasodilation. And the second thing, it would increase the permeability of capillary. That means now the permeability of capillary is increased. Now because of vasodilation, more amount of blood would reach to that site. Initially the diameter of vessel was small, now the diameter is increased, and that's why more amount of blood would rush towards that site. Now because of the increased blood flow at site, there would be redness obviously because of the accumulation of blood, and also heat would be there because of the blood only, because of the increased blood flow at that site. So these two cardinal signs are produced because of the action of histamine that causes more amount of blood at that particular site. Now after the increased blood flow at site, WBCs and specifically neutrophils, they adhere to the endothelium. What is endothelium? Endothelium is the innermost lining of any blood vessel. Suppose this is a blood vessel, and WBCs and basically neutrophils would adhere to the endothelium of the WBCs. Now why they are adhering, I'll discuss here, and after that they would perform diapedesis. Now what is diapedesis? We discussed it in detail in the last video, the last lecture of immunity. In diapedesis, what would happen? WBCs, after adhering at the endothelium, would squeeze out of this blood vessel into the adjacent tissue by the capillary pores. That is called as diapedesis. And after diapedesis, after the WBCs is squeezed out of the blood vessel into the tissue, now these WBCs, the neutrophils, would rush towards this site where there is injury or infection, and that is called as chemotropic movement, because that movement is in response to certain chemicals that are released by that injured tissue. Now when the neutrophils would reach at that site, they would perform the phagocytosis of the pathogens as well as the cells that has been necrosed there. That is the function of phagocytosis. Now there is an increased blood flow at that site, and plus there is increased capillary permeability. Now because of these two reasons, more amount of plasma, that is the liquid part of blood, would leak out of the blood vessels. There would be fluid leakage out of the blood vessel into the particular tissue, and because of that there would be swelling, which is the third cardinal sign of inflammation. So heat, redness and swelling, these three cardinal signs have already been explained to you. Now the remaining one is the pain, and that function is attributed to prostaglandins. Now when prostaglandins are released, they would stimulate pain receptors that are present in your tissue, and because of the stimulation of pain receptor, the body would experience pain. That means pain is a response by the body itself. It is produced by the body itself to make you aware about something wrong that is present inside the body. If I talk about certain analgesics, pain relieving tablets, then what those pain relieving tablets do, first of all they would reduce the inflammation, and whenever there is a reduction in the inflammation, there would be reduction in the pain. Plus they are basically prostaglandin inhibitors, PG inhibitors. That means they would inhibit prostaglandins, and because of the inhibition of prostaglandins, the amount of the pain that you are perceiving would obviously reduce. So this is how inflammation is produced, and this thing would be followed by the healing of that particular tissue. So thank you very much for watching us. Keep connected with us. I'll be discussing about acquired immunity in our next lecture, in the lecture number 3. Thank you very much for watching us.